Yes. So, to the police then. Jim Palmer is the executive director of the Wisconsin Professional Police Association. He gave his reaction to the latest gruesome footage coming out from Kenosha.
Law enforcement officers, just like anyone else, have seen the same video and are very troubled by it. There seems to be a growing belief that law enforcement, for one reason or another, isn't able to do its job, perhaps because of a lack of public support or support of local leaders. And you have some people taking matters into their own hands. And it's no surprise that the United States is a well-armed country. And I think it's very detrimental. And it's very frightening, I think, to a lot of people.
Referring there to those sequences that we've seen of one man in particular carrying a long barrel gun and others seemingly out saying that they're protecting their property.
There has been a growing presence of civilians showing up with their own personal weapons. And clearly they've decided for one reason or another that they're going to do what some feel law enforcement is unable to for any variety of reasons. It's very detrimental. And, we fear that we're missing an opportunity as a state and perhaps as a country to come together and have a reasonable and constructive discourse about the issues not only related to policing, but about systemic prejudice in this country as well.
We've heard of the terms used like armed militia out defending property. Are you hearing these terms? Do you recognise them?
We're hearing these terms. I don't know that there's enough information presently to suggest that it's militia in the sense that it's well organized. But at a minimum, it would appear that these individuals or these groups are exercising their own form of vigilantism. And that is very concerning and it should be concerning to everyone.
Vigilantes on the streets. I mean, what are you doing about it?
Well, I think law enforcement is doing the best they can to keep people safe, keep themselves safe, protect property to the extent that they can. At the same time, allow people to exercise their rights to free speech. I know that law enforcement has made some arrests where they can. As it relates to what occurred last night in Kenosha, we're not aware of any arrests that have been made as of yet.
Well, no, 2 people dead and no arrests yet. Why is that?
Well, I think you have law enforcement spread very thin at the local level. You have hundreds of people, some armed, and they're dispersed all throughout an area or a city, setting fires, causing significant property damage, attacking other individuals. It is a growing challenge.
You, on behalf of Wisconsin's law enforcement community, issued a message to the family of Jacob Blake, the man that was shot in the back by a police officer, according to the video that we've seen. Some of the protesters say that they want charges filed against those police officers. What's happening about that?
Well, Wisconsin was the first state in the nation in 2014 to establish a law that mandates that anytime there's an officer-involved death or a severe critical incident such as this, that an independent investigation be carried out by an outside agency. Wisconsin was the first in the nation to enact such a measure, and to date only 3 states in the country have anything like it. That process does take time, and we respect the concerns that people have when they see that video, but we do want people to respect the process. And if at the end of that investigative process accountability is called for, then I think it should be meted out appropriately.
There's an awful familiarity to this, though, isn't there? After what happened with George Floyd, and we hear that protests are spreading to other cities like Portland and Minneapolis. Are you worried?
Absolutely. I think not just law enforcement officers, but many within the general public are worried. And, while I respect the view and the assertions of people that want the officers in this case charged, and that may or may not be appropriate at some point in time, I am also concerned about efforts to achieve social justice at the expense of procedural justice. And that is a concerning thing, and I think we have to try and strike that delicate balance as best we can.
President Trump called on the state governor to bring in the National Guard.
Yes, the National Guard have been activated here in Wisconsin. They were present last night, and as we understand at this hour, there will be an increased presence of National Guard officers in Kenosha again this evening.
And what difference does that make in terms of policing the streets?
Well, I think it obviously spreads the law enforcement presence less thin, if there's such a thing. So to the extent there is violence, whether it's at the hands of vigilantes or protesters, I think law enforcement will have a better ability to take some kind of enforcement action as needed. And when they're spread so thin as they were last night, I think it's difficult.
Is there a risk of antagonizing the protests, though?
There's always that risk. And it again, is a delicate balance that I'm not sure anyone in the country here has mastered. But it is a balance of, again, allowing people to exercise their right to free expression, but at the same time try and protect people and property to the greatest extent possible. When officers are so vastly outnumbered, that is a challenge. And so calling in the National Guard, I think, does make some sense from a public safety standpoint. But I'm sure that they're going to have to be very strategic in how, those National Guardsmen are deployed.
You talk about free expression, and you suggested that the term militia, vigilante can be used interchangeably to talk about some of these people out on the streets. Is it right that they should be carrying weapons like that? Can you have armed militia out on the streets like this carrying weapons?
I don't think it does anything to settle down the unrest. I think it only exacerbates the problem and runs the risk of escalating what is already a very volatile situation. So it's not something that we support. Yes, people have a constitutional right to bear arms in this country, and that's clear. But
so it is their legal right. They would say that is their legal right.
They would say that is their legal right, but it absolutely has an antagonistic effect, and it's one that's not helpful. And so if they're there to somehow support law enforcement, I would assert that their presence has quite the contrary effect.
Do you see any signs of this awful situation in Kenosha calming down?
As we have this conversation, I do not. And that is, especially disconcerting. We need leaders at every level, I think, to come together, serve the role of a credible voice of reason, and reflect a nuanced view that is perfectly reasonable and appropriate. And that is the effort for social justice is important. And we need to begin to take steps to do more to address those issues. But at the same time, we shouldn't paint law enforcement officers with a broad brush. Even if you enact every single reform that some want relative to police departments, but haven't addressed the underlying causes of systemic bias in this country, I would assert that, we really haven't solved anything at all. We need to really have a constructive public discourse that focuses on a systemic set of solutions to what everybody agrees is a systemic problem. And we're not there yet.
That's Jim Palmer from the Wisconsin Professional Police Association.